All right. Welcome to the Deploy Securely podcast, where we go deep on the security, compliance, and privacy implications of using AI. I'm your host, Walter Haydock, and the founder of StackAware. Today, I'm joined by Rick Doten. Rick is a seasoned cybersecurity expert with over 25 years of experience, most recently having served as Chief Information Security Officer of Centene's health plan. He's a prominent figure in AI governance and security, advising venture capital firms and cybersecurity startups, while actively contributing to organizations like the Cloud Security Alliance, CISO Trust Advisory Council, and he previously served as lead author for the CIS Critical Security Controls version 8. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, at a high level, will you just talk about from your perspective, your experience working in healthcare, how you've seen companies starting to deploy AI? You can go from kind of the most advanced use cases to the most basic or those that aren't even trying at all.
Yeah, it is certainly a range. I'd worked for a large, well-funded, well-resourced organization that had been doing AI predictive models for over a decade, determining things like hospital readmissions or high-risk pregnancies. And this is something that was kind of normal and large, companies have done that in healthcare. All the way down to small providers, doctors' offices, smaller hospital systems that, may only be using tools that may have some AI, stuff in it, right? Or using an LLM for, supporting research or some other things. But I would say specific examples, there are things around, like I said, looking at patterns, helping in evaluating policies, in creating documents, but there's a whole governance that needs to go with it. And I would say that in healthcare, generally, 99% of the folks are not really mature enough to do something with it and have the resources to be able to do something with it other than AI assisted capabilities of platforms they may already be using.
Got it. So when you say 99% of people aren't capable of doing something, you mean like building proprietary AI systems? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, if other than unfortunately, there needs to be a lot of education about AI. A lot of people still think of it as just ChatGPT. We're not talking about, AI assisted coding. We're not talking, they're not talking about, agentic AI and, using agents to do certain things. They're still just doing basic co-pilot assistance, helping with email, helping create presentations. And that's fine, as workforce productivity and back office. But as we get into things specific to healthcare, governance needs to be put in place to define those high risk areas, those things that have compliance issues, and how to make sure that we are able to show transparency to those to regulators, because in all regulated industries, the regulators are very nervous about it.
Understood. And that's a great segue to the next question about, can you talk about the most effective high level approach you've seen to AI governance in healthcare? How is the business thinking about it? How are they working with security, compliance, and privacy, or are they? So just from a philosophical perspective, what are the best practices?
Yeah, it's first defining your AI strategy. We did this 10 years ago or so with cloud, right, as an industry. And oftentimes the strategy is we're going to have a cloud first strategy starting with back office. And then as we get more mature, have, different kind of tooling until we use it for supporting our operations. And so the company needs to define what their mission statement is for AI. Do they want to, do a lot with it to improve productivity? Do they want to, use it only for back office and support things? Do they want to get to the point where they can do it for, clinical decision making, all what the range is? So first, defining it. Second is defining the types of AI, because it's not just one thing. Is it a public LLM? Is it a private LLM? Is it your own model? Is it a predictive model or a machine learning model that you created, or one that you use from somebody else they created, like a domain specific or small language model? Is it something embedded in a tool that's being used for IT security, even like, ServiceNow, Workday, Salesforce, or is it something that's, kind of like a co-pilot kind of circumstance where people can do things and create there, or is it agentic AI, right? So it's like, what kind of AI, and then what is it doing? Is it helping me, pull the requirements and clauses out of a paper, or as the legal community has done with Harvey, what are all the clauses out and helping them and assisting in research? Is it helping to the point of making clinical decisions? And things like prior authorization, where doctors might be spending a lot of time like researching the policy and what's our policy on it, and then taking that thing to put that note in the prior auth, and then making a judgment based on their experience. And so we can save them time doing that, then maybe that's a great thing. So understanding like the realm of things that may be higher risk to lower risk based on the type of AI and the type of thing that it's doing is kind of the core of what an AI governance would include.
Got it. So sounds like bottom line is business alignment should be step one. And you mentioned something, and I just want to clarify because you mentioned open or public versus private models, and I've heard folks use those terms, and I think people may have different definitions. Can you share your definition for those?
Right. So when I say a public model, I mean like a Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini. You buy the license and it's all like public, and it may or may not be, depending on training on data that you give it. Because unfortunately, there's still a lot of people that, their biggest worry in AI is their employees putting sensitive information up into the AI. And like, we figured that out 2.5 years ago. There's LLM firewalls for that. There's policies for that. So there may be a private version of it, that you buy and you put it on-prem or in your own private cloud. That is, it is the public model, but your own version, and it's only trained on only using your data, which you may be more comfortable in sending that. And then there may be, so that's what I mean, like private in that sense. And then there may be distillations of a public model that into a domain specific model that again may be private. So when I mean private, it means like only to your organization. And there's no outside, other than updates and things like that, there is no outside links to training the larger model that other people would be able to get the benefit of.
Got it. So it sounds like you're alluding to a risk that I describe as unintended training. So if a artificial intelligence model is training on information that the provider in retrospect probably wouldn't want trained on, that could be certainly a major risk. So
well, the risk there is really of a compliance risk of HIPAA data. The reality, and we had this discussion like 2 years ago when we were looking at this, is that I think that worrying about that if I have a secret document that I post up and I say, hey, distill this to me, summarize this document form, is like, oh my gosh, you just pushed this up into the model. Now our model's being trained by it. It is not like Google in that there's now a reference to that. It is, if you then ask, hey, if I was somebody third party and I knew that you posted a secret document and I said, hey, can you give me the details of that secret document? AI will take a lot of things related to a secret document, and I'm not sure what's true and what's not. And so it's not like doing in a Google expression language search to saying, oh, you put this secret document on a public share drive that I can now get indexed by Google, and in URL file type PDF, blah, 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 blah. Here's the name of it. I can go find it. It is kind of part of the blob of the training. Now, I'm not saying it's okay, and I'm not saying that it's not wanted, but it's more of a compliance thing that, oh, you violated corporate policy by posting stuff externally that was internally sensitive, or worse, it was, PHI that you put up into a public space that is now being trained on. But getting it out is not as easy as people like to allude to.
So it sounds like
that's a thing that we talk about all the time, and I always like to clarify that.
Yeah, definitely helpful. So it sounds like there are 3 levels of risks that you're talking about. There's one, the potential for just a loss of competitive advantage if a AI system is regurgitating either, partially or in concert with other data, trade secret information. Second of all would be, if there are corporate policies that are being violated or contractual obligations. And then third of all, and most severely, would be something like HIPAA. If you're providing information to a system that you don't have a BAA with, a business associate agreement, you could potentially be in violation of that.
Absolutely right. Yep, that's a great way of distilling it.
Awesome. Awesome. What other risks are on your radar aside from the unintended training one when it comes to AI in healthcare?
Really, it's just the understanding of the architecture and what's possible, particularly when we get to agentic AI. I always refer to agentic AI as an unlimited number of interns with an unlimited amount of time. And I think a lot of folks are, trying to use it for productivity gains. And if, you can do, any layperson, using Copilot or using some other tools to be able to create agents to automate the way they do things, right? In back office or any kind of research type of thing. And so understanding the what accounts are being used, what access you are to data do they have, are they being monitored, is it talking with other agents, if you're implementing a model control protocol, an MTP server, the what is its role, where is it sitting, what is its oversight in these agents. Now there's a 2A agent protocol. Are these agents talking to each other? Do we have visibility in that? And so it gets very complicated, and they are, you may be, agents are trying to do what they are tasked to do, and they may consume resources or escalate privilege or try to get around or share information with other agents to make their life easier or more effective, which may not be what you want it to do. So, and I come back to the case we said at the beginning, where most people are just considering AI as prompting ChatGPT, where a lot of it is embedded in a lot of tools that we don't know about, or if we are trying to do agentic, that we understand what the architecture really is. So a
Gotcha.
lot of education, I think, is what's needed.
Certainly, yeah. So there are tons of potential risks that could materialize from the situations that you describe. Potentially recursive agent calls that could lead to resource exhaustion or disclosure of sensitive information.
Right.
Wild
Unintended
West.
consequences. I mean, every single person I know that implemented, Copilot last year, always found that it's like, oh, we found sensitive documents on shared drives that were over permissive. That we thought that the financial, SharePoint drive was only locked down to the financial team, and it just so happened it didn't, but no one bothered to look very closely at every single directory. But AI doesn't have any other thing to do, and they find them. And so it's not an issue that AI is insecure. It's just it finds insecurity and weaknesses that were already there.
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to accelerate content exploration if you haven't applied the right controls up front. So moving into on the, I'll call it the ethical side, the non-black and white security side of things, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing specifically in the healthcare space when it comes to AI deployment?
Right. I think it's the working with the regulators, and because they don't fully understand all the things we just talked about, and they have historically always kind of come and said, all right, they don't like black boxes. And so that's where I talk about a public or a private LLM. It was like, I need to understand the transparency of that, and that it's going to produce a result that is consistent and it's not biased or discriminatory against a group. That is like the thing so that's really tough. And my friends, and I'm in Charlotte, which one of the banking hubs, and all of my friends in banking, their regulators are the same way. It's like, we don't like black boxes, so we're kind of behind on that curve, because we need things that we created ourselves, that we have understand the interpretability of, that we can show the math. One of the things, a joke that I made last year or earlier this year, we're talking about regulators, and they're asking about hey, I want to make sure this model doesn't have any bias or discriminatory against a group. And I'm like, well, we're supporting Medicaid. I mean, our whole job is to support those, those underserved markets. And as you're probably thinking about public models, which are a lot more broad. And I said I compared it to being a chef here in the South making my own mac and cheese, and comparing it to the box Kraft mac and cheese. And you're saying, hey, the regulators like the CDC comes in as like, or not CDC, but the FDA comes in, or FDC, Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and they're like, hey, we want to make sure there's a less than 1% of bug parts in your mac and cheese. I'm like, yeah, we're not making it in a machine, we're making it by hand. We understand the data, we understand the model training, we understand the prompting because we created all that. So that doesn't apply to us. And so I think that that's one of the things that is like the biggest challenge is educating and showing the regulators like, oh, this is all okay, for the reason because we also want it to be as accurate and consistent as possible as well. Other areas are, just like I said, the implementation of these platforms and the concern about misalignment and drift as agents are to be autonomous. They are making decisions themselves on, oh, this doesn't work, I'm going to try this, and this didn't work, I'm going to do that, or hey, I'm trying to do this thing, let me go here. And as we kind of talked about, I could escalate my privilege, I could ask another agent who has more privilege to do something, I could share data with an agent that maybe shouldn't have the read access to certain things, and there's these things that may drift away from what is intended. And so I'd written a paper this year about AI ethics models, and ethics not being like human ethics, but ethics as being AI ethics. Is it doing what I intended it to do? And can I redirect it to be what I am expect it to do and want it to do? And that becoming a whole area that most people are not at that point yet, other than they're still thinking about hallucinations, which is more of a data and a prompt training and a prompting issue. But hey, these autonomous things are going to, start drifting in a place that you didn't really want. I wrote a very short article describing this called the painted fence analogy. That's a LinkedIn article that I'd written last month about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I agree with you on the ethical part being, does this achieve the intended results? Because it's hard, and we've seen companies like Anthropic try to do this, but it's a slippery slope if you try to bake in certain ethical constraints into AI products that you're giving to other people because you're not exactly sure how they're going to be using them. So I think there's potential for accidents if you apply very strict requirements to AI products that you're giving to other people. But I think the point is well taken about how you need to make sure that the AI system is achieving the desired outputs or the desired end goals of the end user. So yeah, definitely agree with you there.
Right. And that's where our paper talks about that about how our original hypothesis was having like a framework for ethics that you kind of like model like a programming framework, right? But as you illustrate, it's too static. And it also, ethics is ever evolving. It changes by time, it changes by location, it changes by person. And so that decision needs to be at the time of execution while watching the chain of thought, while watching the output of it, that and the circumstance. That's the point where it needs to be applied. And we can have our standards that we want to do. It's like, oh no, I didn't want you to do that, I want you to do this. And again, that's like the short story that I talked about, the painted fence analogy talks about that, and that it's not the AI's fault, right? It's just doing what you're asked it to do. It's just we didn't give it the guardrails and the context to be able to stay in that lane.
Absolutely. So something you alluded to is discrimination, and I think that can be a broad term that can mean a lot of things. But A law in Colorado, SB 205, the Colorado Artificial Intelligence Act, does something interesting by defining the term of algorithmic discrimination, which can apply to the provision, denial, cost, or terms of healthcare. And wanted to see what you've been observing in the marketplace. Have companies been reacting to this? What have they been doing to address these requirements?
Right. I mean, so yeah, I saw that, and I think it's as I kind of described, that's something that we're all kind of getting to. I say, most are not aware because they're not like making models or using models, and they're like, well, okay, well, yeah, I don't want to do that either, and I think it's good to have that written down to be able to say, you know, because we want, as I said before, we want to know that we're going to have consistent outcomes. And though it's kind of funny that, when I talk about AI embedded in tools and things like automated remediation or security operation runbooks or doing data collection, we're expecting 3 nines of accuracy from the agents, where reality is our humans who have been doing that job for decades, maybe 70% accurate. Right. And so that expectation is kind of like with self-driving cars. Anytime a self-driving car hits somebody, we're all up in arms. But like in the time that it took me to say that sentence, I guarantee you 5 people have been hit by cars, even in my neighborhood, right? Just by humans. And so yes, we need to worry about that because we want consistent outcomes as much as possible. And it's good to be able to, that, states are stepping up. I know, Texas also has an AI rule, not specific around healthcare, not specific around that, but some of the states are starting to come up with them to say, hey, make sure it doesn't do evil. Right. And that's one of the things that's important, because when we talk about the public models, most people think about like the big five that we know the names of, right? And Claude and OpenAI and Gemini and Grok and those. But I talk to lots of security startups. Some of them are LLM firewalls. Some of them are deriving new LLMs when they're seeing them through the browser to be able to apply controls to those, and they're seeing 60 new LLMs every single month. And so I can't ensure that they're trained benevolently. So we need to have things like that to be able to make sure that there is no discrimination and bias in the training of it. Because even if I have neutral and benevolent training, because of prompting, because of the data set, there could still be discrimination and bias. And data scientists have always worked on that. And that's one of the things that, in November of 2022, when OpenAI made their Gen AI public to the world, it's like, oh crap, AI has been used by data scientists for years who understood the bias of the data, the bias of the training, and the bias of the prompt. And now you have a bunch of people who don't understand that, and they're wondering why it's not working.
Yeah, definitely. I think you alluded to, GPT or Chat GPT was GPT 3.5, and there had been 3, 2, and 1 before that. And each of those had increasingly performative capabilities, but I think GPT-1, it could barely count from 1 to 10. So we've made it a long way from that to where we are today. On the compliance side of things, you alluded to Texas as well as and I mentioned Colorado. I think Texas is interesting because their law has, I think, a little bit of a lighter touch in that there is a requirement to prove intent in sort of any unlawful discrimination, but that is different than Colorado, where
Right, which
there's
is
no need to prove intent and disparate outcomes could lead to enforcement action, and it applies to both developers and deployers. So, what are companies doing, or what should companies be doing to adapt to this changing landscape and different standards in different jurisdictions when they're deploying AI systems?
Yeah, I mean, and again, for the ones who are, deploying it and know about this, most are just kind of like accepting what may be included in tooling that they're using or platforms that they're just using as software as a service, right? But if you are creating your own, then just like any other compliance, I mean, being a CISO and been a CISO for a multinational company, it's like we fully understand all of the regulations we need to adhere to. 20 years ago when we only had a couple of the breach disclosure laws in different states, and now we have all 50 states have their own breach disclosure law. We know, which, what's the lag time, when do we need to notify, and all those kind of thing, and what supersedes what. And so this just becomes part of the compliance load. And we're like, okay, and in large mature companies, we've seen those, we collecting it. How does it apply to us? We maybe even have AI tools to be able to, GRC tools to be able to say, hey, do our policies match with what this is when this comes out, and what needs to be adjusted? If not, then we have people who do that, right? But for 99% of organizations who don't have GRC programs, they just hope that when they're signing off on the SaaS thing, that the SaaS company did that. So obviously well, understanding that, be able to have whatever transparency we have to be able to show regulators that they are meeting that, and that there is a benchmark of what the standard is of accuracy, to be able to show that if it drifts and that there is some kind of bias or discrimination, that it can be corrected, or to what extent it is. And that may be hard because we don't really understand the interpretability of the model they're using, which could be any of them, how it gets to the answer, right? And that's the why part. And as you indicate, Colorado doesn't care why, they just want to make sure that the output is correct. And it could be like, well, when the model was trained, it was used on a bunch of data that was from this specific region, which may be, more biased towards a certain demographic than another. And then therefore it didn't understand some of a different demographic had different outcomes, and it may shift that way. And so, but again, data scientists understand all of this. And so I guess it's like, have the people who understand that be part of the training. And yeah, that's a thing that, like, for a decade, they, because my writing partners are all like PhD AI data scientists, and so these are things that are kind of well understood to them, but not to most of the rest of the world, which was why I had that reaction when OpenAI made public to everybody. I'm like, oh, okay, we didn't train everybody on this.
Makes sense. So you mentioned the GRC, governance, risk, and compliance side of things. I'll change gears a little bit and ask you about, how are you seeing healthcare companies, specifically vendors like in the health tech space, responding to the increased scrutiny from their customers, mainly corporate customers, but also individuals, in terms of using AI? What are the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's all now part of the third-party risk questionnaire. What AI are you using? Is it public? Is it private? What are you using it for? What data is it learning on? What accounts are you using it with? There's more scrutiny, in the BAAs about, more terms in the BAAs about that. There are things in the contract, that may be, depending on whatever third party or whatever kind of thing, that is like, all right, that any data that you get of ours, you cannot use for training of any model that you or somebody else creates. Yeah. So these terms are now starting to integrate into all of those agreements that, because we know there's a lot of, and again, going back to way it was with cloud, right? If like, oh, I have this third party company, are they using a cloud SaaS tool? Are they using a cloud storage? What is the cloud that they're using? How do I, where's the data center? Where's the geolocation of the data? So those kind of things, again, are a standard practice. Now we have it with AI, all the things that I listed.
Awesome. In terms of the governance programs that you've overseen, that you encounter when you're working with startups, with VCs, what are the highest ROI steps you've seen companies take when it comes to AI governance and security?
A lot of it is like, 90% of security for AI is what we've already been doing. We still need asset management, data protection, identity management, vulnerability management, right? We still need to have, there may be things around the ownership. I mean, sometimes our prompts may become our intellectual property and need to be managed like our code for revisions and version control and protections and need to know access. So I think that kind of like defining how the business is using it and having these, kind of one of the jokes I'd said to a friend of mine who was looking, I was like, do we need another, like, other than AI governance, do we need to like have a policy on AI security? I said, no, a lot of it's just like every other security policy you have, just like, and AI and AI and AI and AI, right? Because all the stuff still applies. And then identifying if there's anything unique to it, that AI is doing, like we talked about with the compliance from a discrimination standpoint, like the use of a third party and a third party LLM and things like that. But I would say the asset management of it, which is a tough part, like what models are we using? Or, there's a lot of shadow AI because there's so many models that people can use. With Copilot, you've given people the ability or not to, create agents on their own to help them. The recording of, Teams or Zoom or whatever, or if there's protected data that I need to be able to control, just kind of, going back to the basics and say, are we covering all the things that we need to for security, data security, identity security, with AI.
Understood. And on that note of, kind of going back to the basics, what do you see as a commonly held but mistaken belief that a lot taking and running with?
I'm trying to think of the, like other things that I have already said, because a lot of those are, again, people still thinking that AI is just ChatGPT, and that the fact that they think that they can block it. 2 years ago, people's like, oh, well, we're not sure what we're going to do with it, so we're just going to block it at the web gateway. I'm like, well, good luck with that, because particularly now it's embedded in everything. Every single tool has it. Every single helper has it. All the SaaS tools have it, and so it's kind of like have your governance. So I guess the short answer would be thinking that you can ignore it or you can avoid it. With cloud, you had to, yes, there was shadow AI, shadow cloud, but from a business perspective, someone had to sign up for something, someone had to post something to do something. AI, it just magically, all the tools we normally use, including our phones, now all have AI. Right. And so it's like, well, how am I going to manage that?
Absolutely. I think there's no avoiding it.
Yeah, I like it too. The tide is coming in and it's, wiping out your sandcastle. Whether you like it or not, it's going to happen.
Indeed. So, as we approach the end of the podcast, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Your own blog, someone else's blog, any projects that you're working on?
So I have, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I do articles on AI and AI ethics models. My writing partners and I had, wrote an article last year on neurodiversity and AI prompt engineering. You talked about earlier versions of the models, and the old, how many R's in strawberry thing, is based on like, how do you prompt it? You'll get different answers, right? And we did a paper on AI ethics models. We just released another one on describing those ethics, and we have another one coming out on the implementation of what an ethic models would look at, as we kind of described, like where you would have these points of observation to be able to correct. And so follow me for seeing papers on that. I have a YouTube channel called Rick Cybersecurity Videos, where I go through the critical security controls, version 8 from 4 years ago, all 18 controls, because I felt bad that we got rid of 3 and we added 1, and knowing, having been a virtual CISO, how long it takes to align your control structure to that. I'm like, let me just at least go through a video of like what changed from 7 to 8, why we changed it, some feedback, some insight on that. And then, yeah, no, just I'm always out and about. But no, I appreciate the time today.
Well, awesome. Rick, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And to all of our viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Until next time, I'm Walter Haydock, and this is the Deploy Securely podcast.